Well, we'd like to welcome you to our Uinta Basin Oil and Gas Collaborative meeting. My name is John Rogers. I'm an environmental manager with the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. The division would like to thank Duchesne County for providing this wonderful facility and all their efforts and to support us here and helping bring this meeting together. They've also provided the breakfast and the morning snacks out there, so we appreciate their efforts there. To begin with, I'd like to recognize Senator Winterton. Where do you go? There he is, one of our legislators, and we appreciate the work he does in supporting the industry. Also, we have our board member, Alan Walker. Thank you for his. And who else did I miss? There, you snuck in, Gordon. I've been looking for you. So anyway, Gordon, appreciate you, and he helps us with our board matters, and that's a great service they provide to this industry. We've been having this meeting here for 20 plus years. Who's been here for all 20 years? Okay, right there, we got one. Anyway, and so we've been following a January, April, July format quarterly. And we've noticed over the past several years, the January meeting just didn't quite cut it. We just didn't get the numbers here. The weather tended to keep people out. It was kind of the post-holiday blues. We had, and then people were preparing for the legislature coming up. So we decided to move to 3 times a year, and we're not going to have our January meeting, and we're going to follow it up with our March meeting, which we're doing today, and we'll follow up with some of the things that happened in the previous few months. And then we'll move to a March, July, November format. So be looking for that. And if you notice, I got my email right there. We usually have a list we pass around to have you sign up with your emails. If you're not getting notices, email me and we'll get you on that email list so you can get notified. Or if you know others that would like to attend this meeting, feel free to share my email with them so we can get as many people here as we can. So be looking for that change, and we'll get notice out to where we're headed. I'd like to just look at some of our past year here for a bit. We've had a great year. This is the production for probably the last 3 years on a monthly basis. And look at the end of 2023. It's just taken off. And this is December represented there, that peak right there. We had over 5 million barrels of oil produced in the state. And let's annualize that. If you say 5 million times 12, that's going to be 6 million forecasted for next year. Who knows where we're going with that, but look at the trend back from that COVID trough back in the early 2020. So this is a monthly basis. Let's look at annualized. I went clear back to 1976, and there we are. We've got a record production, 55 million barrels of oil. And look at, before that, we had 45 and then 35. Look how that's taken off in the last 3 years. Oil is being produced in the basin. It's kind of interesting. I've been talking to some of our field inspectors, and they said actually they're hearing that rigs are being laid down because there's too much oil here. We just can't get it. The markets, we can't get enough to the refineries are over capacity, can't get it out. So we may be seeing those numbers drop down a little. So getting oil out of basin is going to be a critical issue going forth in the future. So here we are with oil. Let's look at the gas side. Gas still is taking off here. We've obviously know there's a takeaway capacity out here, but we're still seeing the production on an increase here. And if we look at this on an annualized basis going back to 76, we're not reaching our highs, no records here, but we're still in the ballpark there. And we're oil dominated, but we want to really, I think gas has a real future out here. And as we've talked in other meetings here, that we're trying to increase that capacity out here, takeaway capacity. So that's something to keep in mind. We've had a good year, and we hope for that 2024 will continue in that direction. Other things just to note, spuds for the year. For those, I know the term spuds is when they actually put the bit in the ground. We had 304, which was not much different from the previous year in 2022. But our APDs for 2023 was 800. That's up from 340 in 2022. So we're doing a lot of work, permitting, keeping us busy there. So it's a lot for the division to keep up with there, because every permit requires an on-site, and it's a lot of work. So it's something the division is really trying to keep pace with. Rig count is down to 12. That's still better than we were way back in the day when we were 0 in the COVID years. But we were 15 last summer, so we have seen some rigs leave. Where did my second page go here? Now, there's been some other changes in our division. As most of you know, John Baza retired last December, and we appreciate his efforts that he's put in to work with the division over the years. He served the petroleum industry, our division, and the people of Utah in promoting energy efficiency in the state. Our new director is Mick Thomas. Mick, can you stand? Okay, let's give Mick a big Uinta Basin welcome. I've known Mick for several years. He comes from us from Idaho, where he held a similar position in natural resources. And he hit the ground running. He started in June, what was it, first week of January? January 8th. And not long after that, the legislation started, and he was like overwhelmed. And so it was the timing could not have been the best, but he hit it, and we really had a good session. And so we appreciate his work there. And and we look forward to working with him. So far in our few months together, it's been great. So we appreciate that. And right now, I'm going to turn some time over to Mick so he can introduce himself to you, and you get to know him. So feel free to talk with him. He's very engaging, willing to listen, and I think this will be a good trend for the division in the future. So, Mick, it's all yours.
All right, I'm not 6 foot, whatever you are, so hold on. All right, I'll just lower it down a little bit.
Let me just go back.
Great. Well, I'm a walker and a talker, so this podium's a little weird for me, but I'll do the best I can to stay in place. Mick Thomas, Director of Oil, Gas, and Mining. I've met some of you, and I look forward to meeting the rest of you over the next probably few days, weeks, and this year as I begin to travel and learn about the state. What John just said about hitting the ground running, because, yeah, it was exciting to start a new role in a new state, and within a week be sort of tossed into the Utah legislative process. I couldn't have done it. I think it was a very successful session, and Natasha will talk about many of the items that we were able to achieve. But I couldn't have done it without my team, a lot of which are in here, really stepping up instantly and saying, here you go, Mick, this is what's going on. This collaborative approach that we have in oil and gas and mining was the reason that I came here. John Baza and I are still friends. We talk regularly. And as John said, I've known John Rogers for a number of years, I think 6 or 7 years. I've known Baza for as long. And how we do things, working with you in the basin and even as a state, is unique and innovative compared to some of the top-down management that other states govern under. And so it was an honor to come. I couldn't have done it without my team, and it's been literally, I've told my team this, literally a joy to be in this role in the first 2 or 3 months, and I still feel that way. My family, we're selling our home in Eagle, Idaho. You may hear from my accent, I'm not an Idahoan. I've lived in a number of places. I'm from Southwest Missouri, very little oil and gas there, right? But long story about my life I'm not going to go into right now, but I'm glad to be here, and this is where I'm going to wind up and stay, I think. A little bit about me and how we're going to move forward over the next, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe even decade, as long as I'm here, at least 10 years. I am first focused on the transparency of our agency. Not just externally with y'all, but also internally, because transparency creates fairness and accountability, which makes it so easy to govern folks and to make sure that everyone's on the same playing field. John Baza and OGM already have a high level of transparency, but there are new ways we can communicate via social media. There's new data that we can probably put up on our site that we can share with you all to make sure you all understand where we are and where we're going. the plans for the agency or for our division are going to be shared openly. And you can talk with any of our staff, and they're going to answer you honestly. And if you get me, I'm going to do the same thing. I may say too much. I may say some inappropriate stuff within reason. And, you know, the people who know me are rolling their eyes already. Hey, welcome to Mick, right? But it's a real treat. I'll also say that I'm a big fan of limited government. We have a responsibility in the division to protect the citizens of Utah. That's our highest calling. I know that a robust oil and gas industry can be complementary to protecting these folks because I see what the operators are doing to keep the water clean and the people treated fairly and to follow all of the rules that we have to live by and work under. It's great to come into an industry where everyone's, I guess I used this saying a few weeks ago, when you come into a new role, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop and find out, oh, that's why it was open or that's the big problem. There's nothing here along those lines. The agency, the division, and the industry get along very well. There are some challenges that I'm working with industry on and staff on to try to make sure that we don't inhibit industry's growth. These production numbers that you've seen, the highest ever, can be continued. I don't see Ricky, where are you at? I know we've talked a little bit. Well, okay, way over there. Hey, the biggest need, I think, is, as John alluded to, is infrastructure, getting our product out of the basin into the national and global market. Whatever the legislature can do to enable that, I'm pretty sure they're doing. I know that, as I've talked a little bit with Senator Winterton and some of the other representatives and senators, that's a goal. That's the governor's goal, is to help enable infrastructure to help the industry to continue to grow. We want to be a part of that. And I would say that innovation in how the state manages policy to enable the industry to succeed, we're ahead of many of the other states in the country that are oil and gas producers. Utah's not mired in the old way of doing things. From the industry to the division to the legislature, they're really trying to figure out how can we stay ahead of the game, how can we enable the best? What new technology can we take advantage of? Are there modernized policies or modernized ways of financial assurance that we can consider that protect the citizens of Utah and our resource while enabling a robust industry growth? And I'm happy to say that we haven't hit any walls there yet. It's going to continue to move forward. But I would say transparency, innovation, and the collaboration between the industry and the folks, the citizens of Utah and the division is where we're going to see the best success and where we've seen it. So a little bit about me. Born and raised in Southwest Missouri. Not a lot of oil and gas there. Did my undergraduate and graduate degree at the University of Indiana. Entered into oil and gas. Worked in Oklahoma City, worked in the Oklahoma and the DJ Basin in the Rockies in Pennsylvania. Accidentally found myself in Hawaii for about a year overseeing their geothermal program. That was so painful I couldn't wait to get back. Well, that's tongue in cheek if you guys know what sarcasm is. Took a role in Idaho so that I wasn't commuting between Oahu and Edmond, Oklahoma. Was there for a number of years. Still left. Did a lot of really great things in Idaho. They've got, 3, 4, 5 wells producing at any given time, so there was other stuff I was doing. I used to say it was a microbrew industry in Idaho, the condensate that they made. But it was a real honor to be invited to this role. I enjoy it fully. Professional background, I debated if saying this, but I'll tell you, I think it hopefully will build a little bit of accountability and credibility. 10 years ago, I was a midnight mud logger in the DJ Basin. All right. I've been in industry in the trailers, taking samples and working my way up. I was able to become a company man, and then I got invited to be a geologist with a mid-major called Devon Energy. Worked my way up quickly, actually looking back to their mid-continent team lean over geologic operations, and really like that. But then I decided to go into state service and have enjoyed that even more. So when you come to me as a field hand or something, I have been there, and it was some of the most fun I've ever had. I really do appreciate that memory, and I wouldn't trade for anything. In college, I didn't want to do it. I thought I want to go right to Exxon and be the top shelf guy, but that field work, frankly, the School of Hard Knocks or whatever, helped me understand things in a way that you couldn't learn behind a desk. No offense on those excellent people who have not had to work in a trailer at 20 below on a January icy morning, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. As John said, I want to be around. I'm going to be around after the meeting. You guys are welcome to come up. If you're, I'll come back out here, and probably I'll be at Price at some point. I want to see the state. This is a beautiful place. I don't think there's a Q&A or anything. What time is it now? 9:20? I've got about 5 more minutes. If anybody has any questions quickly, you can ask me, but track me down otherwise. So Bart's got a mic, and anyway, no hands going up. I'm okay with that too, by the way. Totally fine. Track me down one-on-one and communicate. We're happy to. It's an honor to be here, and I have some of the best staff I've ever worked with. Most fun job I've ever had in 2.5 months, seriously. So that's all. Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mick. We appreciate that and look forward to working with you and getting to know this group out here. If you noticed on our agenda, we're kind of focusing on carbon sequestration. As I've traveled around to numerous conferences, whether it be the IOGCC or the Groundwater Protection Council, carbon sequestration is a big deal across the whole country. And so right now, the current states that have primacy, North Dakota was the first. It took them about 7 years. Then Wyoming came on. It was a little shorter period. Do you know how long it took Wyoming?
11 years building the privacy building the packet until they.
Yeah, so it's a long process. Louisiana just got approved, and this is being approved by the EPA. And we're now in the process. So, and a lot of other states are in the same boat we are right now, trying to get primacy. So I'd like to turn the time over to Richard Powell. He works with our carbon sequestration in the process of writing the rules, getting it all accepted, and he'll kind of give you the basics of where we're at and where we're headed with this. So thank you, Richard.
I'm Richard Powell. I'm the UIC program manager for the division. And I've been given this awesome task of getting us, helping to get Class 6 primacy. So I want to back up for just a second. We talked about John Baza here a little bit, and so I wanted to relate a little story. We were at a meeting here a couple months before John retired, and there was a speaker. They were talking about carbon sequestration, and they were lamenting that it's unfortunate that we talk of carbon when it's sequestered underground, that they call it a plume, and this has a negative connotation. He says they were saying, how can we make this more of a positive? This is a good thing, right? This carbon. And so John leaned over to me and he said, well, we could call it a blob. And so anyway, John was pretty good that way. So anyway, what I want to do today is tell you a little bit about where we're at with our quest to get Class 6 primacy. Okay, so what is primacy? Primacy is the responsibility to administer and run this program for Class 6 wells. The division has primacy over Class 2 wells. We've had that for a long time. And all of you here in the oil and gas industry, you know what I'm talking about. We're talking about oil and gas wells for the injection of salt water for disposal or enhanced recovery, or it can be for hydrocarbon storage. In 2022, House Bill 244 came along, and now that's Utah Code 4011, geologic carbon storage. And the division has been given this task to achieve primacy and stand up a program to administer Class 6 wells, carbon sequestration wells. DEQ administers other types of wells. There's 6 types of UIC wells, underground injection control wells. This is an EPA program, and unless a state has primacy, then the EPA governs these types of wells. So EPA grants primacy. One of the things to take note, when we are in Indian country, EPA still retains primacy. So any of you that operate in areas where there's Indian country, you see that you still go to the EPA for your approval there rather than us. That will be the same case. That's the case with Class 2 wells, and it will be the same case with Class 6 wells. One of the reasons that we are seeking this primacy, if you look at that bottom line there, it says 2 to 6 year permit review and a very large backlog. There are a number of applications out there in the works nationwide with the EPA for Class 6 wells. Around the ballpark, you can get a lot of numbers, but probably around 190 or so. There's actually, as far as I know, 2 active injecting wells in the country right now. EPA's goal is to take 2 years to permit a well. The reality has been that it's generally taken closer to the 6. So why do we want primacy? I think we can do a good job. Obviously, we've been mandated by the legislature that the division's has to take on this program and do it. But there's some advantages there. One of them is that OGM, we've got the expertise. These wells are very similar to oil and gas wells in the complexity, the structure. There's other considerations as far as corrosion resistance and stuff of some of the materials and those types of things. But OGM is well suited to operate this Class 6 program. The permit review, as I said before, those are the numbers that EPA has got. They shoot for 2 years. They've been closer to 6 on most of the ones that I've looked at. John Rogers mentioned that there's 3 other states that have primacy: North Dakota, Wyoming, and Louisiana. North Dakota, their permit time has been 7 to 12 months, and Wyoming 10 months. Utah, we would anticipate that we would be at about the same period of time as those other states, around the 10-month mark, we hope. And I think the program can be better here, administered locally, because of local knowledge and inside. We can be more responsive and helpful and interactive with the operators or applicants for these types of wells. So I'd like to, some of you in the crowd, you might know about UIC wells and what these are all about, but let me give you a little background of just exactly what we're talking about. So there are 6 types of wells in the UIC realm, and let me make sure I get the right button. Okay, you've got Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Class 5, Class 6. We are talking about Class 6. These are the geologic sequestration, carbon sequestration wells. Class 2, these are administered by our oil and gas program. These are injecting primarily salt water into underground formations for disposal, or they can be used for injecting produced salt water from the oil and gas industry into reservoirs to enhance oil recovery. And so that's what we administer. These other classes, Class 1, Class 3, Class 4, which is a banned type of, those wells aren't allowed anymore. and Class 5, those are administered by the Utah Department of Environmental Quality. So we would have the 6s and the 2s here in oil and gas. So Class 2 primacy, just a little bit about it. I said those are just saltwater disposal wells, produced water. Most of you are pretty familiar. Anybody in the oil and gas industry is very familiar with those, the 3 categories. Class 6. Class 6 are, again, wells used to inject carbon dioxide into deep underground formations. And so when you hear the term geologic sequestration, that's what that's talking about. We've got sources of CO2. There's most of the time when CO2 is going to be collected, it's going to be coming right off of an industrial plant, a source, manufacturing plant. It could come from steel or ammonia. For example, there's interest in down around Carbon in Emery County to do some fertilizer manufacturing and stuff, and those processes create a lot of carbon dioxide, and so there's a lot of interest to be able to take this carbon dioxide and inject it into the ground so that they can pursue these other kind of manufacturing ideas. So and there's other uses of carbon dioxide. I want to make special note here, just if carbon dioxide is used for enhanced oil recovery, that is a Class 2 well. And so you have primacy. That would be something that we would permit now. It's only when it's just put away for storage or to be locked up for long term that it would be a Class 6. So the current status, as part of this primacy package, application, we have to apply to the EPA. And that EPA requires a large package of information. One of those, foremost in that, is a rule. We have a draft rule. It's going to be called R644. So far, we've been having an internal review, and many of the people, John and Peter and Andrew and Natasha and John Rogers, have been helping, and we've done a lot of work on this draft rule, and it's getting just to the point where we'll start showing it to other people here soon. But that's a big part of the thing. And then we've got a fee schedule that we've got to develop. In the past, the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, we haven't had fees for anything. This will be a little bit new territory for us, so that has to be developed. There'll be 2 types of fees. There'll be an application fee and then a per ton injection fee to help cover the cost to the division of administering this program and reviewing permits and so on. There's some other things there, a new quality assurance program and whatnot. But we're in the middle of building this program. It's it's a big thing. Some of these are long documents. The rule that we have right now is 40 pages long. It contains much of what is in that rule is federally mandated. We have to have, our rule is required to be as stringent or more stringent than the federal rule. And so EPA encourages a lot of their language from their rule to be used, taken verbatim. We have that in many cases, but when this does go out and we show this rule to stakeholders, our hands are largely tied on what has to be in that rule and what doesn't. And so if we don't have that, like I said, if it's not just as stringent as theirs, then it will be rejected and we can't get the primacy. Okay, John mentioned that there's 3 states, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Louisiana. These states have primacy, so we're in the hunt. There's some other states that are really close, Texas and Arizona. Texas has been working on a lot of permits in conjunction with the EPA. So they've been doing review, and they've got a lot of permits in the in process. But they're working with them. And then Arizona's kind of interesting. Arizona has had no primacy for any UIC well types, and they are applying for all 5. There's 6, but 4s are banned. So they're applying for all well types at one time, which is kind of interesting. And then West Virginia, I'm not exactly sure where they're at in it. I think they've submitted an application, but they're keeping it kind of close to the vest or something, the information there, I'm not sure. So, but that's where we're at. Now, just to give you kind of an idea of where the timeline now, if you look at Wyoming, they began searching, attempting to get primacy in 2009. So that meant being more like where we were at maybe a year ago. And then they acquired primacy in 2020. So you can see it's an 11 years for them. It was quite a deal. Louisiana submitted their application in September of 2021, received primacy the end of December. And so they were two years, 4 months or so. And that would just be the time that the EPA had their packet in their court reviewing it to determine if they would be given primacy or not. So how long, once we have the primacy packet created, how long EPA has it, not sure. If we're looking at the Louisiana model, it could be a couple years. I don't think it will be that long. One of the things that Louisiana had is 50,000 public comments, and so that really added a lot of time to the EPA's permit review. So that's kind of it. That's the gist of where we're at with the primacy quest. Do you have any questions?
Maybe just press some of that. I was just going to say some of that time frame is interactive with the EPA, right? The application gets submitted and they come back and say, well, we're not going to allow this, and so.
Yeah, that's a good point. Once we submit our application to the EPA, I expect to have a lot of dialogue and back and forth with them, and that's one of the parts of our process right now in our internal review is we're trying to work very carefully to make sure that we have a good comparison crosswalk with the federal rule, and that we can demonstrate clearly that we meet all those requirements, so that when we do submit that application to the EPA, they can more speedily and easily go through our rule, and so we'll have the cross references there available. So hopefully we'll do our best to make their permit review time short. All right. Okay, good.
Thanks, Richard.
You bet.
Okay, appreciate that, Richard. We now will turn the time over to Dr. Eric Eidelman of EGI. He's going to talk about the fundamentals of carbon sequestration. Many of us have heard this term, but some of us don't know exactly what it means. So this will give us the basics, and hopefully we'll know more if we leave today. So, Dr. Eidelman.
Okay, let me check this real quick. I guess you can see the mouse on top of the screen, so if I have to point, I'll do that. Okay, so I'm Eric Edelman. I work at the Energy and Geoscience Institute at the University of Utah. So my background, civil engineering and petroleum engineering. I cut my teeth in the oil and gas industry, working for Schlumberger. Began my career drilling wells in Mexico. That was a unique experience. firsthand, getting to learn the oil and gas industry, but also learning Spanish real time on the well site. I'll admit, working with mudloggers who don't speak any English, just yelling at you names that I've learned are not as complimentary as I thought they were. But it was a good experience in general, and it was fascinating to see the industry evolve, and specifically Mexico was a wonderful experience. From there, I came back to Utah to work for a group called TerraTech. So we did a lot of core analysis or rock testing. And so when I began my career, I never thought that I'd be into rocks, that they'd be something that would fascinate and excite me. But it's amazing how much you can learn from them. So are there geologists in the room? Show of hands. All right. We see things differently. Geologists are the artists of the industry. I'm an engineer. They have a different vision. When I see a rock, specifically what I deal with is rock mechanics or how fluids travel within them. I'm interested, when I see it, I think, how much fluid can I push through this? How is this going to respond when we take oil and gas out, or we inject CO2? Will it be able to hold that, or how will it break? With time, will it fatigue? So these are kind of things that we study at EGI. We look at how CO2 interacts with this rock and how hydrocarbons or oil and gas are produced. So I'm going to give a brief overview of carbon sequestration. This is going to be a lot really fast, but we would be happy to come back to give a more in-depth discussion for any individuals within the community that might be interested in spending more time. Ting Shah is the primary investigator on a project in the area associated with carbon sequestration, and she'll give a deep dive. So time-wise, we're going to roll with this. I understand we have a lot of time, but hopefully you don't get tired. So at EGI, within our group, specifically looking at carbon sequestration, we're led by Dr. Millen Diao, and then Brian McPherson is the manager of our group. So we have an assortment of legal individuals, which if you've met Rob Simmons, he's a great personality in the state. And then we have other scientists that specifically look at the geology. They look at how the fluids travel and the risks associated with sequestering CO2 in the subsurface. We also have individuals that look at potential seismic activity that might occur, whether you're injecting doing saltwater disposal wells or CO2 that also. So what is carbon sequestration? So why is it so interesting? So the federal government has kind of helped motivate it or bring carbon sequestration to the forefront. So carbon sequestration is the capture of CO2 from emission sources. Many emission sources, if we think directly about it, coal power plants or natural gas power plants, as they combust, they produce and they release CO2 in the atmosphere. Concerns are that CO2 levels have drastically increased over the last 100 years and even more so in the last 20 to 50 or 20 to 30. But as this CO2 is captured, I'm going to talk about the capture. Andy Baxter is going to come up in a little bit and talk about the methodology for how this is captured. Very fascinating, but it's not my area of expertise. So once CO2 has been captured from a point source, i.e. this coal power plant in this instance, there are many options with it. What's the value here in the Uinta Basin? So there are several things the basin could do with it. Some individuals have looked at sequestering or pushing the CO2 into coal seams deep in the subsurface. Others would specifically look at injection to freshwater aquifer or saltwater aquifers. And then another would be to use CO2 for EOR, or enhanced oil recovery, which in the basin is rather exciting because there are so many different formations that produce. There's good containment that there might be potential there for improving hydrocarbon production. But the other that Ting's project in particular looks at is the storage in saline aquifers. You can additionally make saltwater caverns for disposal or long-term storage, but we focus primarily on the saline aquifers and then the potential for in the basin looking at EOR opportunities. So what makes a good target for CO2 or carbon sequestration? On the left-hand side, we have the strat column of the Uinta Basin. We have several colors that UGS has put on this diagram. Red denoting gas formations that are producing, so we can see several intervals. Oil and gas mixed are in green on the side. And then we have in blue are the water disposal. The black, there's one black, two black, three. Those are what we call the seal rock. So I'll pass these around. So when you think about a reservoir, it's important you get your hands on it. You know, how many of us have physically been into a reservoir in the subsurface? Many of us, when you hear the word reservoir, we think of a lake. We think, oh, there's this large body of water. I can go put a boat on it. We can go fly around and have a good time. In the subsurface, this is your reservoir. This is Navajo sandstone. You know, this is a target within the state for sequestration, for CO2, or for saltwater disposal. And then what's the seal? So there's a certain attributes with CO2 that's interesting is the buoyancy. As we compress it, it's lighter than water, denser than air. So it will sink in atmosphere, but it will rise if we put it into the a water solution. So you need to have a seal. So a seal, right here we have the Green River Shale, which any of you in the basin know that in instances this can have up to 60% TOC. It has very unique attributes in that it inhibits how fluids can travel within it. Fluids can still travel through it, but it's very slow. As opposed to Navajo sandstone, you can almost breathe through this sample. And so as you inject CO2 into the subsurface, it travels through the Navajo sandstone, and it is sealed above by something like the Green River Shale. So we're going to pass these around. And then this is the other one that when I was in school with Al back in the day, Al and I are the same age. We were in school together. The Newfield Energy, they gave us a tour of their treatment facility, and this is actually produced waxy crude from the Uinta Basin. So if you get a chance, smell it, might want to touch it. Hopefully, if it heats up, it actually gets rather runny, but right now it's in the waxy form. So I'm going to pass these around. We can talk more about it later. So when we look at a reservoir, what makes a good reservoir? So there are key attributes. So actually right now we have CO2 in the room, but it's not in a supercritical state, it's in a gas state. So a supercritical state sits between a gas, a liquid, and a solid. It has different attributes that all reflect all different states of the scale. So it flows like a fluid, but the density is much higher. And it's important that we inject it because we can store more CO2 in a supercritical state. It flows and is retained much more easily than in a gas state. So it's important that we, number one, we look for the depth and that allows us to meet a critical pressure for it to be there. It's important that we have a cap rock, just as we looked at the Green River Shale, that the porosity and permeability, the ability to push fluids using the permeability, and then the porosity is the void space within the rock. The presence of formation waters. So formation waters or brines are important because if you've ever had a soda, so Sprite is a good example. When you have a Sprite and it isn't open, is there CO2 in it? Do we know? We hope so, because if we open it and it's flat, it's not going to be good. But when you open the Sprite bottle, you see the flash from a supercritical, you see a flash from a gaseous or a supercritical state into a gas, and you see all these bubbles that come out of solution. So when we inject into a freshwater or a saltwater aquifer, you can actually get solution where the CO2 will be bound within the salt water. So the geologic stability, so it's important that we do not induce seismicity or earthquakes. So these attributes we talk about, the porosity, the permeability, the cap rock integrity, are important attributes in making sure that the CO2 stays within the subsurface. The access to infrastructure, the Uinta Basin has pipelines, it has wells that help to characterize, it has wells, injection wells. We know a lot about the subsurface in the area. And then the regulatory and legal framework that Dogma had talked about earlier. The primacy, why do we care about primacy? I mean, that was a question I was hoping to put out the Dogma to understand. You know, why do we care that the state regulates the Class 6 wells? For me, it comes down to state control. The state better understands the local community and engagement for valuing where we put Class 6 wells. The next, public acceptance and environmental considerations. It's important that all of you as the community here, if we were to move forward with carbon sequestration, that you feel comfortable and you feel that it is something that we can do. Similar to putting the saltwater disposal wells here, it's important the community is aware of what goes on and how it transpires. The next one is monitoring capabilities. So it's important once we put the CO2 in the subsurface that we have confidence in where it is, that it isn't just freely flowing, that the seal that we talked about in the Green River Shale, that it's good. And the next one is the economic viability. Without the economics behind it, these projects don't happen. So what occurs in the subsurface? So this plot up here, the green is the supercritical CO2. It's the plume. It's the buoyancy as it floats up. The cap rock right here, oh, sorry. I'm on a roll. Uh-oh, you're seeing too much. Okay, so the cap rock in yellow, that is our Green River Shale. That's what's inhibiting the CO2 from flowing upwards. The green is the supercritical CO2, and then the blue on the bottom left in this area right here is our saline aquifer. The two fluids won't necessarily fuse together similar to what we see in Sprite, but over time they will. The CO2 will diffuse into the material. We study how these mechanics might occur and how they happen. So on the right-hand side, we have what's called a thin section. A thin section is a razor-thin image or a piece of the Green River Shale that when you hold it up to the light, it's transparent. We can see certain attributes of the Green River Shale. What geologists would do a much better job, but when I look at it, it's very tight. It's the way it's formed with the clays and everything. It inhibits CO2 from flowing. On the bottom is the Page sandstone. That's very similar to the Navajo sandstone. This right here, these are the grains, just taking an image. But what you have here on the right-hand side, the blue space that you see is actually impregnated epoxy. It shows the pores or the open spots where CO2 would sit in the subsurface. And so those pores are important because that's how the CO2 will be situated and how the neck or the throats of these pores interact will result in some CO2 being held in the, man, I am flying. Sorry guys, here we go. Let's see if this will, I'm taking too long also. Okay, I was gonna talk about different processes. Long story short, what we can see right here is with time, when we put it into a material that's called basalt, with brine, you'll see a mineralization occur. The CO2 is hard and it actually becomes physically, it physically mineralizes and it no longer is a fluid anymore. We'll talk about carbon sequestration. The university, 15 years of experience within the industry, we work to characterize, we work to develop monitoring methodology. We evaluate the risks associated with this. Simulation plays an important role. People sit there on their computers all day and plug in numbers, but it's important that they have the right numbers. So it's important that we engage with operators in the area to take rock samples like the ones being passed around so we can accurately reflect these results in simulation. I'm going to check real quick. How much time do we have left? I have 2 to 3? Okay, all right. So we're getting to the meat of the situation. So the federal government came about. Operators aren't just going to step out there and perform this work. It's important that they have support and that there's monetary support. So the federal government stepped in. They said, okay, we'll provide funding. We're going to pull these groups together specifically to look at storage opportunities and how we can develop carbon sequestration. Our group here at EGI at the U and with other universities in the West, we work in what's called the CUSP initiative, Carbon Utilization and Storage Partnership, that characterizes regions or areas that might have the potential for sequestration to occur. Now, the incentive here, the financials must make sense. No company is going to spend the money to make this happen, to put CO2 in the subsurface, if the financials aren't there. So the federal government has brought a tax incentive, which is the 45Q, provides tax credits to help support the capture and sequestration. That comes in the terms of $85 per ton, sequestering into something like the Navajo, or $60 per ton if CO2 is utilized for EOR options in the state. This has evolved in twofold mission. The carbon capture side is what Andy Baxter deals with. We have dealt with the storage capture. In this 2024 right here we're sitting, we're bringing these together to actually see these projects brought forward to put CO2 captured and sequestered in the subsurface. So we are all learning as we're going. There's a lot of experience that's present, but there's a lot that we still can improve on. So within the state, this diagram, the dark colors are actually the oil and gas plays in Utah. We can see right here the Uinta Basin. You know, within the state, it is the anchor of hydrocarbon production. The different colors within this plot, the light shades of blue, are the reservoir quality or the potential for storage, which the Uinta Basin, as Ting will talk about in a minute, has a lot of capacity and opportunity to perform something like this. This is a project in southwest Utah where we're looking at an Iron Mountain subsurface to capture CO2 from an iron facility and sequestering in the southwest region of the state. And on that, I will let Ting, we'll be happy to talk more later, but thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you, everyone. Glad to be here again since last November, and I will give some updates of our carbon save project in the Uinta Basin. So, overview of our project. It's in the Uinta Basin near the Bonanza Power Plant, and our goal is to establish the feasibility of a commercial scale CCUS complex in this region, and our target is to store at least 50 million tons CO2 within 30 years. And our carbon save project is one of the series of projects sponsored by Department of Energy, and we are in the phase 2. We are here, and hopefully, if we get successful project of this phase, we will probably get phase 3 and phase 4. That will be another 6-7 years, and hopefully after that we will inject CO2 in underground after that for real. So here's our project prospects. We hope we can build a community of CCUS, and we capture CO2 from any point sources, and we inject it into underground for storage and or CO2 and we can also utilize that CO2 for other industrial purposes. As well, we probably can have some direct air capture projects in the area and also inject the CO2 in underground. So we emphasize the social considerations that include community engagement, workforce development, and environmental and energy justice. So right now, DOE also focus on these topics, and there is a new opportunity of regional initiative for technical assistance partnership, RITAP. So our team submitted a proposal back in February this year, and our target is the whole Uinta and Piceance Basin, and we will do heavily on technical support for stakeholders. So if you have any interest in CCUS, please just contact us and let us know what's your interest about CCUS. And back to our carbon save project, this is our team. I'm the PI of this project, and also Dr. Brian McPherson, the manager of the CO2 group in the EGI, is a co-PI, as well as Mr. Michael Vanderberg in UGS. We co-lead the project, and also we have industry partners of Desert Power and Home Engineering as our operator. So we successfully developed our advisory board. We are very proud to say most of these people are local. They live in the basin, and they are from different sectors. They provide many useful suggestions for our team. And I'm working on engaging more advisory board members, including UB Tech, the Ute Tribe, and hopefully you can get some contact in Rangeley because it's an oil field using CO2. These are some pictures. I visited UB Tech and the Ute Tribe Educational Department. So here's another update for our project. In late January, we successfully had our field trip plus a project kickoff meeting in Vernal. We visited the Bonanza block, and we learned some geology there, and we saw the Bonanza power plant there. It's a landmark. And also we visited the dinosaur monument for more geology lessons. So we visited some outcrops, and we had lessons there. And also on the next day, we had our kickoff meeting in the Bingham Research Center. So great acknowledgement to Dr. Seth Lyman to provide that place. And then, so now we are having a risk evaluation questionnaire. So if you are interested and if you feel you have some thought on the risk aspects, please scan this QR code and help us. We really want to know the thought of the local people and also the industrial people. So if you can help, that's really appreciated, and we will provide a small gift, a beautiful a picture of the Wasatch Front. It's not super fancy, but something. Yeah, that's my update. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, any questions for both Ting and Eric?
So, sorry, that was like drinking from a fire hose. But what's important to understand is, like, if you'd like to talk one-on-one or you'd like to spend more time, our group would be more than happy to speak with anybody here, to put together an opportunity to come back. You learn more about carbon sequestration than I learned in a semester in college. So there's a lot to take in. So any questions in general about, Ting's project, Bonanza Power Plant on the Utah-Colorado border, this is going on real time, looking at opportunities here in the basin.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, why don't we take a break for about 20 minutes, 10:20, and we'll start back then. Let me just- Okay. Hey, thanks.
Check, check.
I know. Okay, we'd like to get started if we could. Those out in the hallway, if you could come in, and we'll continue on. What?
But I'm gonna switch it up right now, just so that we have it.
Andrew, are you out there? There you are. Okay, we'll start now. If you would, we're going to continue on with the fundamentals of carbon capture. We talked about where we're going to put the carbon, but now how do we get it in the form where we can inject it? So we have Andrew Baxter with Sustainable Energy Solutions, and he'll give us a presentation. Andrew, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It was a beautiful drive down this morning from Utah County, where we have our offices. I'm Andrew Baxter, as you just heard. I'm the president of Sustainable Energy Solutions. Co-founded that company here in Utah quite a few years ago with my father. And we've got some familiar faces here that have been around supporting and helping in the same space with us for a long time. So it's great to see those familiar faces. We are part of Chart Industries, so you can see the Chart logo here. So about 3 years ago, we sold our company to Chart Industries, and they haven't fired me yet, so I'm still running the company, but we're part of Chart. It's possible, and I'll throw up some kind of brands here. It's possible you're familiar with Chart Industries if you've seen, we do cryogenic tanks, air coolers, big blowers, stuff like that too. So it's a company you may be familiar with. I am not a geologist, so like Eric, I'm not a geologist. I do like rocks, but I've noticed that I've been kind of doing the rounds with Eric lately in the state, doing some presentations, and I've noticed he has something in common with my 7-year-old son. Wherever he goes, he's handing rocks out to people, and I'm always having to empty rocks out of my son's pockets before they go in the washing machine. So I think he may be a future geologist. But anyway, great to be here with you. I'm going to talk kind of broadly about what happens before you get to the wells that you've been hearing about. So primacy, that was a great discussion this morning about primacy, really good discussion about sequestration and the geology of what happens there. I'm kind of going upstream, which, sometimes I'm used to thinking about this going the other way. You capture the CO2 at some kind of point source, and then you work your way down to the well. But I thought it was appropriate, since we're here in the oil and gas, with the oil and gas community, we start at the well and work our way backwards. It's kind of the opposite of the way some of us think about that. Just real quick about Chart. We're a global company all over the world. We've got manufacturing facilities all over the place. Here's some brands that you may be familiar with that Chart does. So like I said, we do have in the oil and gas fields, we've got some air coolers, we've got big fans, big compressors, things like that. Also related to oil and gas, some of the big things that Chart does is natural gas liquefaction. So small scale up to very large scale natural gas liquefaction projects, around the Gulf Coast to export LNG from the U.S., or smaller scale projects to move LNG around. And we do lots of tanks and trailers and all kinds of other things. Anyway, there's that. So you've seen several slides that look kind of like this already. Like I said, we're going to work our way up to the capture portion of kind of this slide. So if we look at that, sorry guys, give me one sec. There we go. So if we look at this, you can kind of think of, people talk about CCUS, CCS, carbon capture and storage. You can kind of think of it in maybe 3 parts for a typical technology, maybe a first generation technology. And a lot of you guys maybe are familiar with things like amine plants that exist at like natural gas processing facilities. So an amine plant, right, typically is removing sour gases from the natural gas stream. And usually that includes like CO2 and H2S. So an amine plant is an example of carbon capture, right, on a natural gas stream. And if you are looking to store that CO2, like we've heard earlier today, in the form of like a supercritical fluid, so a typical amine plant maybe out in the oil patch or out in a gas field is just going to separate that CO2 by chemically absorbing the CO2, and then you're going to heat it up, right? Usually you've got a steam generator or something, you heat that amine up and it releases the CO2 as a gas, and most of the time you're just venting that to the atmosphere. So now if you imagine what I want to do is I want to take that CO2 and I want to put it in the ground to keep it away from the atmosphere to avoid regulation or to take advantage of some tax credits or for whatever reason, then you've got this second step here. So we start out with the CO2 capture and separation, then we go to the CO2 compression. You have to compress the CO2 down so it's at a high pressure, lower volume, so you can transport it, usually if it's large scale in a pipeline, to get it to the point where it can go to a Class 6 sequestration well or a Class 2 enhanced oil recovery well, like we've heard about this morning, and put it in the ground. That's kind of the whole CCS, value chain there. A few important things. So this shows a pipeline. It is possible to transport CO2, not in a pipeline, but as a liquid. And we can talk about that in a minute. But also I wanted to spend a minute on this slide just talking about different sources of CO2 emissions. So the largest source of emissions in the world and in the United States is power production, fossil-fueled power plants, right? Coal-fired power plants, natural gas-fired power plants are the largest single source of emission, and that's what's represented here. And of course, we have several really good baseload power plants in the state of Utah, both natural gas and coal-fired plants that are also our largest emission sources. Some other really important emission sources that are interesting are cement plants, lime plants, other industrial plants, and we have those here in abundance as well. And an interesting thing about cement and lime, also fertilizer, some of these plants is that, at some level, you could replace a natural gas-fired power plant or a coal-fired power plant with a solar panel or something, right? The cement and lime industry produces, as kind of a natural byproduct of basically cooking rocks, CO2. And so you can't really replace those things with anything else. So that's just kind of by their nature, the only way you're going to reduce CO2 emissions coming from those types of industries is through carbon capture and doing something this way. It's also very important for the power industry, but just kind of an interesting distinction between kind of industrial emissions and maybe power emissions. I'm going to take a drink once in a while because I've got a little bit of a scratchy throat here today. We also are doing some work right now on lean burn, rich burn engines out in Texas, out in the oil patch there, also at some production facilities in the oil and gas space. And so those large engines can be a significant enough emission source to produce CO2 that can be used and transported and stored there. As I kind of flip through here, I'll just kind of make the point that, the world has set certain goals, right, for reducing CO2 emissions, and carbon capture and storage really is key to achieving those goals that we have, and we're probably behind where most people would want us to be in terms of implementing that carbon capture. So let me talk to you about some different types of carbon capture. So I brought up kind of the example of an amine plant. It's the most common one that most people are familiar with because it comes from the natural gas industry. Naturally, when people looked at doing post-combustion capture, meaning instead of separating CO2 from a natural gas stream, separating CO2 from the gas that's coming out of the stack at a power plant or a cement plant, then they said, hey, we already know how to do that with an amine chemical, and we're just going to adapt that from the gas industry to post-combustion capture. And so today, amine capture for post-combustion is also the most mature capture technology. The largest installation in the United States of carbon capture is at the Petronova power plant near Houston, Texas, and it's a Mitsubishi amine technology. But there's some other technologies you may be somewhat familiar with or maybe not. So there's solid sorbent type technologies where instead of using a liquid or aqueous solution with amine in it to absorb CO2 and desorb it, you use a solid that has similar properties, absorb CO2 and desorb it, either with heat or pressure swings. There's also membrane technologies that get used pretty frequently also in oil and gas that you might be familiar with. The technology I'm going to talk to you about in more detail today is a cryogenic technology, which is the technology that we've developed. You can also look at capturing CO2 through some pre-combustion methods, and some of those include oxy-combustion. So so if you think about a kind of typical combustion process, right, what you're doing is you bring air into the process, the oxygen and the carbon combine in the combustion process to make CO2, and what you have coming out of the back end is mostly nitrogen, a little bit of oxygen that didn't burn, and the CO2. And so when we're doing post-combustion capture, what we're doing is separating the CO2 from the nitrogen and the oxygen on the back end. So if instead of doing that, you remove the nitrogen part in the front and you just fire something with oxygen, then you end up with almost pure CO2 or much higher percentage CO2 coming out the back end, and then you don't have the same separation problem on the back end of the process because you get, instead of maybe between 5 and 20% CO2, you get over 80% CO2 coming out the back end, and you can purify that and then liquefy it. So that's another way carbon capture is done. Or using something completely different like a fuel cell, which can result in higher CO2 purities or capturing the CO2 or concentrating the CO2 in a different way. Transportation has come up a lot here. Already, or I guess we've talked a lot about sequestration wells, but there are some different ways you can transport CO2. For large-scale capture, a pipeline really is the only practical way to do that. And pipelines, similar to sequestration wells, are interesting, and they're an important part of the infrastructure that makes carbon capture possible. The biggest challenge with pipelines is not technical. we're really fortunate in the United States in that we've been transporting CO2 in pipelines for a long time. Most of the rest of the world has not been doing that, but we've got a lot of experience doing that for enhanced oil recovery. And in this region, some of you are maybe familiar with CO2 being transported from Wyoming down to West Texas for enhanced oil recovery, things like that. So this isn't new territory for us. But permitting, like any pipeline, and again, the oil gas space, everybody knows that pipelines and permitting pipelines, and I think we've been talking about pipelines out of the Uinta Basin for a long time, can be a challenge. And that's true today for CO2 pipelines as well. So along with, a lot of permits being submitted for Class 6 sequestration wells, there's also permits and plans being made for new CO2 pipelines for sequestering CO2. Like any process like that, there's been some headlines with some of those permits being pulled or being rejected based on various things. So it's an important area to be aware of as well. And some of those pipelines are moving forward, of course. If you're not going to move the CO2 in a pipeline, which you can do as a supercritical fluid, as we heard earlier, then really you're looking at liquefying the CO2 to move it in a truck or a tank. So, if you go up Highway 6 past Price, there's several CO2 plants actually down near Price, and you'll see trucks hauling, sometimes a bigger trailer and a smaller trailer, CO2 liquid from the Price area. And so you can haul CO2 in trucks. Typically, those trailers hold about 20 tons of CO2. So you can imagine if you've got a power plant that's maybe doing, a large coal-fired power plant can do 5,000, 10,000 more tons of CO2 per day. You can see why that would become impractical. But for smaller sources of CO2, moving by truck is feasible. Usually you've got maybe a 100 or 200 mile radius that you can move that CO2 by truck economically. If you have access to rail, you can expand that. Similarly, you're going to put liquid CO2 in a rail car as opposed to kind of supercritical CO2 in a pipeline, but maybe you can get up to 1,000-mile radius moving the CO2 on that rail car. So just some kind of interesting things there. And then what do you do with the CO2? So we've heard a lot about geologic sequestration already. There's some alternatives. Enhanced oil recovery is the single biggest use of CO2 in the United States today, and I mentioned those pipelines that are moving CO2 into West Texas and other places for enhanced oil recovery. So or some people call it tertiary recovery. So after a well is not producing as much as it was initially, then you can inject CO2 down into the well, which results in higher pressure and lower viscosity for the oil, and you produce more of it. But you can also do things like create fuels from the CO2. You can use it to cure concrete. There's traditional markets, and we saw a slide earlier that covered some of that, right? Everything from carbonating, beer, Coke, Pepsi, things like that, to making dry ice, to medical uses and industrial uses. So now I'm going to kind of dive into our specific technology. I think it's interesting to learn a little bit about a Utah-based technology that was developed here, and it's also a technology that has some interesting advantages over kind of first-generation amine-based technologies. So our company, Sustainable Energy Solutions, was founded here in Utah in that 2010 timeframe. We have our offices in Orem. We've done testing at the Hunter Power Plant sorry here, guys. I've done testing at the Hunter Power Plant. I've done some work at Huntington Power Plant. So if you look at this slide, this picture, kind of the middle right, is actually our small test system at the Hunter Power Plant where we're capturing CO2. The picture on the left is at a cement plant. We have done some testing here in Utah at a cement plant. This one happens to be a cement plant in Alabama where we captured CO2. An interesting aspect to that cement plant demonstration is we captured CO2 from the cement plant and we worked with a partner company called Carbon Cure that uses CO2 to cure concrete. And they took the CO2 that we captured from that cement plant and they mixed it in with the cement in curing concrete that came from that plant, and they were able to sequester the CO2 that way. And so it was the first time in the world that we were aware of that kind of a full life cycle capture and use case happened in the cement industry. As I mentioned, we were acquired by Chart back in 2020. Today we're working on 2 different 30-ton per day carbon capture projects that are being built. One of them's here in the United States on a cement plant in Missouri. Another one is an international project on a combined cycle natural gas power plant. And we're doing feed work, front-end engineering work for multiple other projects, some of them as large as 10,000 tons per day from a coal-fired power plant, and kind of everything in between in the cement and lime industry and power. This is a quote from Howard Herzog. He was one of the founders of the MIT Energy Initiative. He wrote a book on carbon capture a few years ago where he identified this technology as the one that had the most potential of all the technologies he was aware of to overtake amines as the technology of choice for post-combustion capture. Okay, so this is the same graphic as before, but highlights kind of a key difference between this cryogenic carbon capture technology and the others that I described previously. So basically every other technology out there separates the CO2 and produces it as a gas, which means then you have that second compression step that you need to get the CO2 either into a liquid form or a high pressure form so you can put it in a pipeline. Our technology inherently produces the CO2 as a high pressure, high purity liquid, so it's ready to go into the pipeline or into a tank on a trailer or a rail car, and it's ready for transportation and use. So we kind of do those 2 steps in a single process. And the way we're able to do that is just because of the fundamental way that we separate the CO2. So where, with a solid sorbent or an amine technology, you're using chemistry to absorb the CO2, to desorb the CO2, our process is much more simple conceptually. What we do is simply cool down the gas to the point where the CO2 freezes. So just like when it snows or rains outside, as the air cools down, the first thing that freezes in the air is the water turning into rain or snow. Once you remove the water from a flue gas or a post-combustion gas stream, CO2 does the same thing. As you cool down the gas, the oxygen and nitrogen freeze or condense at a much lower temperature than the CO2. So we're just cooling down the gas stream to the point where the CO2 either freezes or liquefies depending on the application, and then just separating that liquid or solid CO2 from the gases. We then warm up the solid CO2 or liquid CO2, and we also warm up the light gases. And the reason we're doing that is to recover the energy we put into cooling it down in the first place. So when you think of a typical refrigeration system, right, something like your air conditioning, you put something warm in, something cold comes out. This is different. You put something warm in, we cool everything down, we separate the gases, but then we warm it all back in up so that something warm comes out. So it's a pretty bad refrigeration process if you're trying to cool something down, but it's very energy efficient. What you see here in this video on the right is a camera that's actually inside of our pilot system. So that's solid CO2 that's been separated, and now it's melting under pressure in our system and turning into a liquid. And so you can see why it's very easy for us to produce that CO2 as a high pressure, high purity liquid. So just kind of some of the benefits of this technology versus alternatives. This is the lowest energy and the lowest cost retrofit technology we're aware of. It's also the easiest technology to retrofit onto an existing plant. It handles contaminants, things like SO2, NOx, H2S, a lot more robustly than like an amine system does, so that we're able to retrofit this on existing plants much easier than these other technologies. We also are able to produce that as a high purity liquid and hit very high capture rates. And we have an energy storage aspect to this technology that's pretty interesting as well. So this is a little bit more detail of what this actually looks like. So for the engineers and process people out there, it's a little bit more interesting. I won't go through it in too much detail, but basically what it comes down to is it's a series of towers and heat exchangers in this process with refrigeration system at the end. So if you look at this diagram, we start here, we go through some initial cooling towers, we go through a blower, then we go through a heat exchanger, another separation step here, a heat exchanger. Here's the refrigeration process. This is where the CO2 goes through a distillation column once it's a liquid to purify it. Another kind of one of the unique things about this is because we have that CO2 as a liquid, then we're able to distill it and get up to very high purities to the point where it could be used for food and beverage use or other applications. And then once it's a liquid, it's very easy and cheap for us to pump it up to whatever pressure is needed, whether we're going into a pipeline or a tank or a truck. The other thing this highlights is, you know, our company started up as just a startup company here in Utah, developing this concept. We took the initial intellectual property out of BYU to develop this, but sold the company, as I said, in 2020 to a company called Chart Industries. And so everything you can see highlighted here in blue is actually a piece of equipment that's manufactured by Chart or Howden, which is a subsidiary of Chart as well. And then highlight up here that this process, if you look at a traditional natural gas liquefaction process, this looks a lot like that. So, you know, in a natural gas liquefaction process, you're using a refrigeration system to cool the gas down to the point where that natural gas liquefies. We use a very similar refrigeration system, very similar heat integration, but instead of liquefying natural gas, we're either liquefying or freezing CO2. So it's been a really good fit for us to be able to grow our company and expand from kind of a, you know, R&D type company to commercializing our technology. I want to make sure we have some time for any discussions or questions or comments anybody has. So this is kind of the end of my initial presentation here.
Yeah, I had a question. I work at the Bonanza plant. How much energy does this process consume per ton, or however you guys have measured it in?
Yeah, there are different ways to measure energy consumption. One useful way to measure it is in parasitic load. I say useful in some ways because something I didn't mention is that our technology uses mostly electricity as the energy input. Other technologies like an amine technology uses heat. And so a parasitic load, right, is how much of the output of the power plant do we use in order to capture the CO2? And that's kind of useful because you can compare, you know, heat to electricity and stuff and just say, what are we consuming there? One reason that has limited use is because depending on the efficiency of the plant, you know, on the front end of that process, your parasitic load can change a lot. So if you start off with a really inefficient plant, then you might have a lot higher parasitic load than if you start off with an efficient plant. So I'll give you two different kind of numbers here. So if you look at a brand new kind of supercritical coal-fired power plant, then we're in the 15 to 20% parasitic load range, which sounds pretty bad, right? But the only reason it's not that bad is because we're competing against technologies that are in the 30 to 50% parasitic load range with like amine technologies. What that translates to in terms of like kilowatt hours per ton for a typical coal-fired power plant would be something between 200 and 300 kilowatt hours per ton, depending on the CO2 concentration. So energy for almost all carbon capture technologies, the energy it takes to separate the CO2 is pretty dependent on the CO2 concentration you start with. So for our, so just to give an example of some different industries that are out there, if you look at a natural gas fired power plant with a turbine on it, then the CO2 coming out of that plant, the CO2 in the exhaust gas is going to be like about 3%. Okay, if you look at a coal plant like Bonanza, it could be as high as 15% once you remove the water. And so that doesn't sound like that big of a difference going from 3 to 15%, but what it means is to separate the same ton of CO2, we need to process 5 times more gas at a natural gas-fired power plant versus a coal-fired power plant. And so it takes a lot more energy to capture from like a gas plant versus a coal plant. If you look at something like a cement plant or a lime plant, they can be up as high as 25% CO2, and so they're going to be even lower cost to capture from.
Could you speak to the pipeline construction requirements? Could you speak to pipeline requirements as far as construction, how they might look different, CO2 pipeline versus a natural gas pipeline?
Sure. Yeah. So I can generally. We have a relationship. So some of the most experienced, CO2 movers in the United States are companies like Occidental Petroleum, Denbury. We also have a public MOU with a company called Wolf Carbon Solutions or Wolf Midstream. So those guys know more than I do about it. I'll just say that, and I'd be happy to actually connect you with them if you'd like. But CO2 is kind of a special molecule, especially supercritical CO2, and so there are specific requirements for a supercritical CO2 pipeline. It has to do with materials, but also how things like cracks propagate through the pipeline and things like that. So I could kind of talk at a high level. It is possible to transport pressurized CO2. So something that some people are looking at is, maybe you've got an abandoned gas pipeline, and people are looking at using that to transport the CO2. But typically, if you're doing that, then you're doing it just as a pressurized, but not as a supercritical, as a pressurized gas, but not a supercritical fluid, which means you're moving less of it in there. But you cannot just kind of swap out supercritical CO2 for pipeline, even in a high pressure natural gas. So that's about as much as I can say and feel comfortable with it. But we've got some really good contacts that we'd be happy to connect you with in that. Anybody else there? Okay, thanks. Happy to talk to anybody after.
Okay, thank you. Our next presentation will be by Dusty Monks of the Office of Energy Development, and he'll be addressing Utah's energy strategy.
Well, glad to be here today to join you guys. I just changed roles not too long ago. I've been here before, spoke in my old capacity. I'm now a deputy director there, so that just came with more headaches apparently. So not near as fun as it used to be. But what is fun about it is to get to be engaged a lot more with policy. And our directive for our office, our primary directive for our office, is to implement the state energy policy. And what comes with that is an energy strategy that they've asked us to really build out so that we can drive results to reach the state objectives in its energy policy. And so some of that I'm going to talk to everybody today about. With all my presentations, anybody that's seen them, I like to kind of set some context and maybe some mindsets a little bit to help understand some of the gravity of what we're working on and why we do things we do. So first, introduce you to somebody you may seem familiar with, John D. Rockefeller, born in 1839. Should know him, he's the founder of Standard Oil, who dominated the oil industry during that period. It got so big that they had to dissolve the company because it was a monopoly and threatened a lot of people's feelings. And so, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but anyway, what we see from the remnants of that, you should recognize these names, which are still huge players and very recognizable contributions that they give to the industry. He actually is recognized as the world's richest person ever. There's some debate about some guy in Africa who had a lot of gold, but quantifiably this guy, even today, is considered the most richest, wealthiest person. If you're to take his fortune and put it into today's money, it was $410 billion or greater. Right now, the nearest person to him is just almost half that. Elon Musk comes in; he's more recognizable in number 2, and he's a little less than half that. He's around 200 billion. So that gives some context on how wealthy this guy was. Significantly, 200 years. Well, where are we at? Yeah, almost 200 years ago, 150. The reason I bring this guy into the conversation is Warren Buffett made an interesting comment in an interview about this gentleman. He said, and in less words than he said it, but he said, even the bottom 2% of American earners all live better than John D. Rockefeller did, which kind of takes you back a little bit and try to figure out what he meant. And what he was specifically talking about is our well-being as a society. And he says we live better because of modern medicine, modern education. That's debatable at some of the universities. Entertainment, transportation, all of these things have made our lives so much better. If you look at it from that perspective, it's not by accident, though. There's some certain things that led to the development of our modern life. Now, if you look at our modern life, what we enjoy today, it's not very old. It's really not. It's fairly young in its infancy. And so a lot more people in history has lived a lot less quality of life than we do today. And there's basic fundamental principles that actually enabled that. Some of those we recognize is free market principles that was espoused. And also there's other freedoms that unleashed human potential, that we were able to drive that human part of energy to get us to where we are today. Now, speaking of energy, all this was made possible by energy. And not just any energy, it was brought by the abundance of reliable and affordable energy. And so, what is Utah's strategy? This year was a fundamental year. This was like, let's align ourselves with these fundamentals that build us, that got us where we are today, so that we can use that same power to drive us where we want to go in the future. And so if you look at, and I like the Hawks principle about this, if you look at it from the fundamental aspects, Hawks said, simple, clear purposes and principles give rise to complex and intelligent behaviors. And that's very evident when you actually look at it from that context. So our modern life, being young as it is, it comes with pros and cons, and it does have some vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities are that since we've disconnected from the old way of life, we're now super reliant on the abundance of affordable and reliable energy. That becomes a wonderful thing, but it also becomes a threat. And so when we look at that, unfortunately, we have evidences around the world that people are shifting strategies in the developed world and actually threatening some of these basic principles that led us to these circumstances. So you could probably put a name on this gentleman. I put a little deeper thought into this, obviously, with a picture of a trees that's just developed, and now some of these countries are taking an axe to its roots. And unfortunately, fortunately, we're seeing that it pop up in many ways. And some of the very specific ways that it's happening, we're seeing obstruction, and we're seeing disincentives, specifically to drive up cost of carbon. I mean, that's pretty much how it boils down to, however they decorate that one. Then on the other side, they are heavily subsidizing other types of resources that couldn't cut it in the market before. And the reasons it couldn't cut it is because there was some misalignments or compatibility issues with consumers' consumption patterns. It's fairly simple. Not saying we can't overcome those. I'm saying that those challenges need to be overcome before they become the mainstay. And so their overexuberance before resolving those challenges is now bringing those challenges that are impacting people today, unfortunately. We're also seeing some of these threats coming by force consumption reductions. That's kind of loaded. I'm not going to get into too much detail about that, but it's very real and it's very concerning. For the sake of time, I'm not going to belate this, but this is what we're talking about. It's not speculation. This is an example of Germany here. I'd like to pick on them because they're long ways down shifting their principles, their strategy to a different strategy, and their results are showing quite heavily, and they're feeling those impacts today. As you can see in this picture, they're producing less electricity, they are generating less electricity than they did 15 years ago, and this is despite almost doubling their capacity to generate. Very interesting story there if you look into it. And if you can see my yellow line, the prices joined the negative experience. So they've basically limited consumption. Prices have gone up. The energy availability is constrained, and there's lots of evidence as to where that's being seen. The state of our office, we did a little study. We say, hey, let's use the data that they use. Let's apply the Utah way that we were developing the strategy. Say, okay, we could apply this to data that's in Germany. How would we look? We found that the blue is existing scenario. The other three colors, orange, gray, and yellow, are our possibilities of pass. Each one of them significantly cheaper, and two of which actually, so just to hedge that a little bit, their primary focus in Germany was decarbonize. That's what it was. And so that was an externality that they focused on. Instead of being a part of the, decarbonization being a part of the big picture, they only pictured in it. Consequences are definitely showing. But we actually showed we're not fixated just on decarbonization, but also other things. And we could show that we're actually exceeding their cuts, what they realized by default of our efforts. So it was just an interesting study that we did. It's very high level, a lot of details there that need to be considered, but it sure passed the first test. We weren't the only ones that actually looked at this. Columbia University, not necessarily friendly to carbon, but they did a study and they found, and I did the math, so I'll make it real easy because it's really boring. So their reduction in their reduction in their goals that they have met, they haven't met their goals, but they have made progress toward them. Their emission reduction of CO2 is like taking 2.8 million cars off the road. That's what they've been able to do over the last 20 years. If you were to apply this, or if they wouldn't have switched, the study found that they would have took 22 million cars off the road equivalent. That's quite interesting because that's half the vehicles that's on their road today. So I like to tell people Utah's energy strategy will actually hit net zero goals before California will. And it's not because we're focused on that, it's because doing the right thing drives good results. And that's what I'm emphasizing today. So to get into the meat of it, so high level stuff. What is our energy strategy for the state, and what does it look like? What is the Utah way? And it's quite simple because we believe that creating a strong foundation aligned with the basic principles and fundamentals that got us here will get us to where we want to go, with making improvements along the way. I'm not saying that we just keep following a path even if it doesn't make sense, but there is improvements that need to be made. And those can be made as long as we have the power to do so. So the first is recognizing that energy is a fundamental. I mentioned before that we have and we have disconnected our way of life from the old way, so now we're vulnerable to where if we don't have access to abundant of affordable and reliable energy, we'll actually be worse off than they were before. Urban life would be impossible. Just think of the waste systems, the drinking water systems. It's intertwined with every basic need a human needs now in the quantities we need, and especially when you look at the food industry and the challenges that comes from that. So the bills this year incorporated some of this, well, pretty much all of this, to help protect these, to incorporate these fundamentals that say, okay, this is where we start the conversation. So the second part is keep space for fossil fuel. That's fairly simple and fairly obvious, is that we recognize that it's got a long life ahead of it because we've got a lot to accomplish still, and we're going to need all that support to get us where we want to go, just like we've done in the past. And so it just keeps space for it. We're not a big fan of eliminating valuable things without replacing with something just as adequate or better. You know, I kind of pick on Germany. They're not alone. We got federal government. We've got other states who are choosing a different path. And some of them, it feels like they're jumping off a cliff and trying to build their wings on the way down. And Utah says, hey, we're not going to, because that's recklessly endangering their citizens, is what that turns into being. They're gambling on their lives and livelihoods. So Utah says we're going to take a different approach. We look at the current realities, apply these principles, and we'll make a better approach. So the third one here, reduce supply. Reduce supply doesn't equal reduced needs. And what do we mean by that is reducing the supply of energy doesn't necessarily mean that people will need it less or use it less. Utah isn't any of the above state, but really we need more of the above, not less. And it's only growing. And so we can't be undermining our energy stability with hopes that we can gain our goals. The next is, it's really not about coal and oil. There's a lot of people that say, you're just saving coal. You're just an oil guy, which is kind of true. But it's not about that. It's actually recognizing the current realities to meet and capabilities to meet current need. That's all. And coal and oil have done a super job at doing that. Now, it may not be in the future, but nothing replaces it right now adequately. And so Utah says we got to accept that reality, and our wishful thinking and can be for, I guess, the other states and other nations. And last, people say, well, what about our health? You read the Salt Lake Review and you'll find out that they're very concerned about that. Well, Utah recognizes the pivotal role that energy plays in our society, in society's health and well-being. While energy cleanliness is significant, it does not monopolize health and well-being. Having adequate, reliable, and affordable energy is vital for society's survival and continued progress. But we need to get, just like we have in the past, got and made improvements and got where we wanted to be, we need to use innovation to get us where we're going to go. And so Utah is also investing in targeted, innovative work that will help bridge that gap between where we are and where we're headed. So there's a few of these bills this year. There's been a suite of bills. Senator Winterton can speak to those at great length. It was been an interesting session. It was fun. But here's a few that directly affect our office here. The first bill that is on here is actually the energy policy for the state that got modified this year and got aligned with these fundamental basic principles that I talked about. And so this is the core of what we do as an office, as we go forward now with the directives from the state legislators and the backing of the governor. This is what our office is to implement. And so if you're interested in that, You can go read that fun bill. So basically it focuses on meeting energy demand. So building energy systems, the only reason we create energy is because people need it, right? We don't create it to reduce emissions. We don't create it to create emissions. We create it to fulfill a need. So we got to build a system. The solutions are at the consumer and build your systems to their need instead of trying to make the consumers fit the resource supply, which is going to just be a train wreck, as we've seen. So we have a very, I think the humility of this bill is very important to emphasize, because Utah recognizes that energy is significantly complex. And to claim that we know what's best and what the future is going to look like is very naive and reckless. And so that's why we can only go to a strong foundation and say, we know what built this great nation, and we know how it worked, so we can apply these principles and move forward. We don't know what the future is going to look, but we can hold to these that's got us here at least and make some good changes as we go. Number HB 48, this one was where they implement, this one where they actually put this to work. They say, okay, time to get to work. And so this bill instructs our office with a couple of specific things. One is it actually gets us more involved with legal things. Specifically developing strategies to advocate for the state's interest in federal energy and environmental programs, overseeing legal strategies to address federal overreach and a delay in permitting, engaging in federal rulemaking and advocacy for regulatory reform. The second part of this one is also has a, they want to have, they say good data drives good policy. And so our office is going to be tasked with modeling future plans, supply and demand balances, and with its individual resources, and find out a good, clear path for Utah and make sure we understand the impacts as the policies become and as development progresses. 410 on the list is the San Rafael Research Center. The state purchased that. That's part of that innovative side where they're elevating innovation. It's pretty cool. Got some good opportunities there, and the state's going to drive innovation through that arm as one of the goals. HB 191, this basically says we recognize that there's some overexuberance to get where people would like to go, and so that comes back to the obstructions or disincentives, and so you start seeing some of our energy supplies coming offline prematurely. So this bill says, no, you can't do that unless you have something adequate to replace it with. HB 224 is a forward-looking thing. It says we understand consumers' patterns, consumption patterns. Baseload meets those because baseload's starting to come off heavily. There's a war on baseload. It's not just coal. You look at the Northeast and you see their hydro's coming off. Hydro's amazing, but it's coming offline. And so you see it's actually a war on baseload. So the state says, we're not going to take that. In fact, we're going to double down a little bit on that until we can get some clarity. So there's a lot more bills. I'm out of time, but I'm open to any questions, any comments.
All right. Dustin, question. The interstate system that Eisenhower put in America in 1956, frankly, is probably one of the largest things that enabled our development and our success as a country over the past 60, 70 years. Looking at power, personally where I am and where the other states have been in, everybody wants a solar field here or a windmill field over there, or we find a great hydrocarbon resource. People aren't talking enough about the infrastructure needed to move the energy and the resources around, from transmission cables and everything else. Where's Utah? And again, I'm still kind of learning, right? But where are we on that? Because it's really cool and exciting to talk about a new field or being able to get our oil and gas to market. But what are we doing as a state from an infrastructure standpoint to move the energy around, because that has everything to do with the economics.
That's a great question. So a lot of the foundational stuff we put in there actually can drive the correct conversations on that, because if you look at what's available to us, there's nothing short of great ideas out there. There is a ton of great ideas, and it's impossible to chase every great idea and try to develop everything with infrastructure. So we have to be very targeted in our approach. We have to say, okay, what makes sense? What is actual, how many commercial viability that reaches our objectives? The state recognizes that, for instance, geothermal is a good example. We have geothermal resources with a part of our states that really could use a lot of infrastructure on the electricity side to provide continued development of that, or to provide commercial viability of that. We have people talking of hydrogen, which is infrastructure nightmare. We talk about renewables, solar and wind. If the state goes the route of solar and wind, you'll have to build your grid out three times the size it is now. If we go the route of nuclear, we won't have to do that near as much. So making good decisions, we say, okay, we could go nuclear, wouldn't have that complexity. We go solar, we'll have this complexity. So we'd have to actually map, you'd have to map these out according to the targeted resources that we're gonna have to encourage. It's not an easy answer. It's a very expensive one. There's a number on if we go solar and wind, which would take, I'm talking WEAM as a nation, it would cost $2.5 trillion to do, and that's just on the grid and stuff. And so we could take that $2.5 trillion and put it in more promising resources with less infrastructure-intensive requirements.
Okay, as I talked about earlier, we moved this meeting to March so we could have a legislative update. And so we're going to hear what happened. First, we'll hear from Natasha Baloff, who is our legislative liaison with the division, followed by Bart Kettle, and then Senator Warren Winterton is going to give us how it really happened. So we'll go there.
Hi, I'm Natasha Baloff. Can you all hear me? Do I need to adjust this? Okay. I'm Natasha Baloff. I'm the Legislative and Policy Coordinator for the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. I have a very short list of bills that I'm going to cover. I only have 6 including our produced water bill that Bart will speak on. So to get started, maybe. Okay. Oh. I don't know how to count, I guess. I'm going to start with the middle one, House Bill 433. This is brine amendments, and this allows for a designation of multiple mineral development within brine mining operations. And this bill also requires the division to study brine mining operations and report back to the legislature during the October interim committee meeting. The brine study will include evaluating current and potential regulation of brine mining operations. We will determine which state agencies have jurisdiction over the various activities related to brine mining. We will identify necessary safety measures, address spacing of brine wells, address multiple mineral development, and any other issues that the division finds relevant. House Bill 452 is carbon capture amendments, and this will repeal 2 different funds and replace them with the carbon dioxide storage fund. This also addresses the board's authority to impose fines and then deposit that money into the carbon dioxide storage fund. And House Bill 502, this one kind of came up at the end of the session, and this will require the division to conduct a study relating critical infrastructure, material operations, and related mining, or sorry, I said that incorrectly. Conduct a study that relates to critical infrastructure. And that study will, this is a big study, it'll include an inventory of current operations, including the number and location of operations, the levels of production, and the extent of which materials meet UDOT's standards. It will include an inventory of new operations that may be created or operations that may be expanded, and we will also be considering zoning and market supply. We will assess projected future demand, including effects on residential and commercial development and planned projects, an analysis of impacts on local infrastructure and possible mitigation, an analysis of regulatory requirements the operators face, and then whether or not operations should be licensed, permitted, or otherwise regulated, and any other issues that the division finds relevant. Moving on, I'm going to skip House Bill 295. I'll briefly address it and then pass the time over to Bart. So House Bill 353, this one deals with our minerals program, and this will move the public comment process, or the public comment period process to the start of the permit review process, which we're hoping will streamline our processes. And then this will also clarify the difference between an amendment and a revision within a large mine NOI, or notice of operation. House Bill 373, this is mostly the division helping out DEQ. We will basically be making sure that operators have a pollution control facility located on the property within the division's jurisdiction, which is basically the sites that we're already inspecting. We'll probably just go out there, check a box, issue a certificate, and then DEQ will handle all of the rest. Part of that bill also addresses DEQ boards and commissions, but we don't really care about that because we're the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. And then House Bill 295, this one is produced water amendments. This one, we met with stakeholders months before the session, really solidified the bill. It went through really well. This will allow for the use of produced water within oil and gas operations without a water right requirement. And I'll have Bart come up and he can discuss more of that. I guess before we turn the time over, do you have any questions on the bills that I presented? Yeah.
What's the definition of pollution control facility?
That is a really good question that I will have to look up. I can look it up and get back to you after when we.
So
go
the
to
question
lunch.
was, what is a pollution control facility? Yeah, there's some definition in code, and that bill directs us to do rulemaking, and a lot of that will be defined in rulemaking.
All right. Bart?
Okay, so on HB 295, I want to kind of connect it to the collaborative a little bit if I could. As Natasha mentioned, it was some series of months in the working. And one of the things that we've tried to promote over time for the collaborative is when meaningful connections are made, then you get results that follow. And I really feel like HB 295 is a really great example of that. For me as an individual, most of you probably know I was born and raised right here in this community, just south of Roosevelt. The last 20 years, working with the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, I've also had a connection to oil and gas development here in the basin. And through that entire period of time, there's been always some discussions about like, how can we use this produced water? And HB 295, the produced water amendment, starts to provide a way to do that. Obviously, the last few years, as we're switching to horizontal wells, there's increased interest in reuse of produced water. It starts to make more and more logistical sense. And this bill starts to pave the way for us to actually do that. So if I could, I would say I think it's a pretty exciting time in that regard, because here we are. I have a limited scope of experience, but it expands, some 4 decades, getting really close to 5. And we have a way to reuse produced water at this point. And it all started with the meaningful connections, and I can't see her. I know she was over this part of the room, but Ricky with the Utah Petroleum Association getting it kicked off, ourselves with the division, many of our elected officials, Senator Winterton sitting in the back was involved in the conversations, Representative Lund, and Senator Vickers for sponsoring the bill, Representative Chu, our county commissioners, starting that conversation. It all started based on meaningful connections. So as I know we already had a break, but as we go to lunch and that, just remember how important those meaningful connections are. And so HB 295, like I said, it starts to pave the way for the reuse of produced water. The bill has some very specific subsets on what produced water can be used for. And connected to it, but not necessarily because of HB 295, just here in the last week, we've kicked out draft rules on what recycle or reuse facilities could look like. And we'll be doing an open house April 17th in coordination with the Division of Waste Management and Radiation Control. That'll be at the DEQ building in Salt Lake. So once again, April 17th, and that's an open house to start to discuss how disposal facilities, as we've known them in the basin for several decades, will be handled from a regulatory framework going forward, and also how reuse or recycle facilities will be handled moving forward. And then starting May 3rd, we'll start stakeholder engagement for the actual feedback and rulemaking portion of it. So with that, I will just kind of pause for a second and see if there's any questions. Okay.
So I've got two questions. The first question is there any regulations pending that would make a requirement of the producers or the drillers to reuse produced water?
No requirements that require them to reuse it. However, it will be tracked, so we'll start to know the volumes that are reused.
Okay, so does that mean that there's a possibility in the future that it won't be voluntary?
I wouldn't rule out the possibility, although the intent of the bill and the intent of the rulemaking is not to require, but more to enable. The incentive, I think, within the oil and gas industry is to reuse that. We've seen investment pretty widely across the basin into infrastructure to reuse water without that certainty. So not necessarily to require, but definitely to enable it and make it a possibility.
My other question concerns the, I don't remember which paragraph it was in your paper that you guys just distributed, but there's a section in there that refers to the responsibilities of a certified engineer who becomes legally liable for design, construction, and operation of the water treatment plant or the solid waste treatment plant. I wonder how an engineer can be responsible for operation.
Oh, great question, and I think this starts to dive into the specifics of the reuse facility rules, and we definitely welcome this question May 3rd when we get into the stakeholder engagement. That'll be a great time for it. But the certification is more about the construction standards and not so much the operations post-construction. Okay, if there's no more questions, Senator Winterton, I think it's yours.
I don't know what to do. I don't want to bore you with going over what Dusty talked about it legislatively or Bart. But, you know, we worked on energy. The thing that's been frustrating as a legislature is that in the state of Utah, we've always just allowed energy to happen. And it's whatever you produce and whatever it comes out of the pump, we'll survive, we'll live with it. When you talk about the electrical grid, we have, some smaller co-ops, and then we have Rocky Mountain Power that supplies 80% of the state of Utah. And we're just at their will. Well, when you start looking at the federal administration guidelines, and we're all going to go green, and so you're going to have a lot of this wind and solar energy in that. Well, as the state of Utah, we have a lot of resources here that provides a lot of jobs, and the economy in Utah pretty well is surrounded by the nature, whether it's tourism, the outdoors, or mining, producing our resources. And so we took that into account last summer, and as we looked at what do we need to do as a state as far as addressing state policy, energy policy, and what were some of the things that we were facing? Well, the uncertainty of affordable, dependable, reliability, and dispatchable energy. Where does that fall? Well, as Utah, we feel like it falls into our natural resources, into fossil fuel. We're not against any of those. In fact, we'll support anybody that wants to come up with an alternative energy sources. But we want to be able to go over and turn on the lights every day. We want to be able to have the air conditioner. And when you get entities outside of our state that's controlling some of our resources or our outputs, that's alarming. Last year, Utah became a net importer of energy instead of an exporter. That made the lights come on to most of those in my group in the fact that what changed? Are we so geared on trying to please the administration that now we're going to see our energy costs triple in costs in the next 5 to 10 years? And they want to decommission a lot of these coal-fired power plants, but we have no replacement yet. Well, we'll open-armed allow nuclear to come into the state of Utah, but that's not going to happen overnight. In fact, Wyoming, been working with Wyoming, they're 2 years ahead of us, and there's 20 years out before they're going to have the power plant up and operating to replace the Huntington and the 100 power plants down there. So in the meantime, where do we get our energy from? Hopefully we have a lot of wind and we have a lot of solar that will be able to do it. Now they're talking about, well, we're developing batteries. I just read an article this morning that will tell us that they'll have 72 hours of backup battery, lithium batteries, and they can store a lot of energy. The state of Utah, our needs, if you project our growth in that, we are going to be so far behind the curve that we need to get used to either what California is putting up with rolling blackouts or high energy costs, or buying it off the grid at the duck curve in demand peaks. It'll be 10 times more than what you're paying right now. So we want to keep ours affordable, and that's why we've recruited so many people and businesses here, is because number one, Utah was number one ranked in energy costs, and especially in electricity. And so I don't think things are changing. So last year we looked at all of those things. So we addressed the energy policy. They've done a good job talking about what did we do? Well, we defined clean energy, and anything that meets that, we're going to allow in the state of Utah. But we also charged the Public Service Commission that they have to have contact with the Department of Energy. And their decisions now are going to be driven upon, is it affordable? Can we do it at a reasonable price without, causing economy to collapse because of not having coal miners or not having oil and gas fields operating? Now, California is finally seeing some of the light, and they've deemed that natural gas is okay. It's not a fossil fuel. But their governor said, you get those natural gas power plants up and running as fast as you can, because we're not going to have these rolling blackouts. Now, that could be just a campaign speech or something, but they have earnestly in the last year worked hard to get these power plants up and running, and they'll allow natural gas. But here in Utah, the war on coal says we're going to shut them down. We can use natural gas, and IPP power plant down in Delta, they're now converting and building a natural gas power plant which will convert to hydrogen later on. And so they're trying to take all of the air permits that we have for that thing, for this natural gas. Well, it doesn't work for Utah. And so we had a bill that addressed the concerns of the IPP power plant. You're going to decommission it. Well, the state of Utah, because you are a quasi-government entity, we're going to have the first right of refusal. You're not going to dismantle that plant. We're going to leave it in place because we know that we're going to need the energy. And if it's decommissioned and trying to go through the rat race of permitting again, we will still be in the dark when we finally get something permitted. Permitting is one of the things that is probably the biggest beef that I have right now with our federal agencies is it takes so long to permit anything. As good an idea as it is, it still takes a long process. So we're now looking down the road, what are we going to do to make sure that we keep the lights on? Dusty addressed some of the, I mean, we've tasked the Office of Energy with a lot of things this year, along with a study and a writing a plan and the policy that the legislature has now deemed it's going to happen. So that's, you know, I'm one of 4 in the legislature that is on a National Energy Council that we go around and try to find the best practices and what works overall. So in talking with a lot of those other states and the Canadian provinces, we're trying to come up with a policy that works for the state of Utah. In that order, we actually passed a bill that discussed the sovereignty of the state of Utah. When the federal government passes laws that mandates that we're going to do certain things, sometimes it's not in the best interest of our states. And so now we've put the federal government on notice that you now have to sue us if you want us to comply. We had one bill that told the state agencies, sheriffs and that you're not going to come and prosecute anything that we deem that's against the state of Utah Constitution and what we feel. So we're trying to protect our industry, our economy, and our citizens and be able to do it at an affordable rate. We had some bills that we passed relating to water. They talked about the produced water one, and Bart's exactly right. I mean, that bill came out during the summer. We had conversations, and then at the Energy Summit, our water engineer came out and kind of alluded that that's a water right. You're going to have to go through permitting in that. That kind of raised everybody's eyebrows. It was a good effort in collaboration on schooling them to understand what the produced water is and that there is value there. And this kind of stems back from the water engineer being tasked that we have a water shortage, we've got to find new water and that, and they go, oh, we've got that. Well, to allow you guys to be able to use that and recycle it in that manner is great because it saves a lot of the fresh water that everybody's trying to find. And we have a lot of water here in the basin that goes to the Salt Lake Valley. And every time they keep talking about, well, it only affects the Salt Lake Valley. So your legislation says that it would impact us because we contribute to that watershed. Oh, no, no, no. But they haven't made that clear. And so it keeps you on the toes trying to make sure that we're defending, you know, our valuable resources here in the basin. We have one bill that we passed regarding water that brought a lot of emails, a lot of texts, a lot of angry people. Our Senate President and the Speaker of the House were the sponsors of this bill, and all it was to organize a task force or a committee to go look at the resources in the state and then outside of the state. Can we do it? And then it set up a water agent that had the authority to go out and start looking out of state to see if there might be some water that we can bring into the state of Utah to meet the needs that we're going to have. Because right now, we don't have the needs. If we continue to grow like we are, we won't have any more lawns or green because we're going to have to use it for just human consumption. And then we had one more bill that as a state, we've never put money away to do water projects. I mean, storage water projects. And so we put money away. We also set up a commission and we started looking at the studies saying, where does it make sense that we're going to make a reservoir or a dam, or how do we use the resources we have? Can we pipe it? We have one in southern Utah that great drainage and a lot of water. It's the Virgin River, and yet nobody's tapped into it. And so we've appropriated money to actually do the studies and build a dam there in which it'll help Kane County, and then into the fall it'll go into Washington County because of the growth and the needs that they have for water. So we're doing things like that in the state of Utah. I look at the two bodies, the House of Representatives and then the Senate. And the Senate, we look at long-term and we look at, is it good policy going forward? And so a lot of the bills that we might not see that are a high priority is because what kind of a policy and presence does that send for us? And so we try to make sure that the decisions we make will help the generations to come, because I think that we're charged with that. Here in the basin, we understand the Central Utah project a little better than others, and yet if it wasn't for that project, the Salt Lake Valley down there wouldn't be what it is, because they wouldn't have the water resources if it wasn't for that. And so now, we had projects there that never was developed, and it's spilt milk. We're not going to cry about it, but going forward, are there other opportunities? And so that's what I see. Some of the charges and the roles that I have in the legislature is trying to help us develop our resources and keep our economy to the point where we have a quality of life that other states envy and want to be here for. And with that, there's 591 bills. If you have a question on bills, whether it's housing, there's a lot of topics that we could do. I did a real quick printout, and I have 60 pages, and I have 2 to 3 bills on every page that gives the highlights of what those bills done. And I didn't do all 591. And that's not a brag, because I hate the thought that we have 591 bills. It's not a bad place to live in Utah. Some of them, probably 200 bills maybe a year would be adequate for me, but that's crazy to have that many. So questions? Not, thank you.
Well, thank you, Natasha, Bart, and Senator Whittington. We appreciate your insight to the legislative process. Sometimes we don't understand it, but it's always good to get that insight, so thank you. Now is the time for our collaboration, for public comment or for people to make announcements. So at this time, I also would like to recognize our county commissioners are here today supporting this. From Uinta County, Sonia Norton and John Larson, and from Duchesne County, Irene Hansen. And I believe, Irene, you had something to say. Do you want to come up here or just from back there?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. The Commissioner Miles and Commissioner Killian hate to miss this meeting and try very hard to never miss this meeting because it is so valuable. Thanks so much to the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining for their continued work to make sure that this happens. Appreciate the staff here in the building, as well as our commission assistant, Melissa Hughes. But again, kudos to the division. This has turned out to be one of the best meetings to be to, and I think they do deserve a round of applause for that.
Thank you, Irene.
They're our friends, our colleagues. We call on them frequently for advice or sometimes just to vent. And again, they're what they do for the state of Utah is invaluable. With that, I would like to take a second. Deb, if you would stand. Deb Herron is our new Economic Development Director for Duchesne County. And so feel free to visit with her. She will be at these meetings going forward and will be very active in working with each of our both regulators, companies, and the supply chain that serves the industry. The other thing, and I'm going to hopefully rely on Mike Hyde. I hope he's still here. We are going to take, I guess, some wisdom from Uinta County. Duchesne County is going down the path of going to probably start requiring conditional use permits that will be approved for the most part administratively. It won't be something that will necessarily go to planning and zoning unless there's a question, but on all oil and gas development and kind of those related fields. We feel like it certainly isn't that anything is getting away from us. It's just that we sometimes don't know what's going on. We can't plan, decide what to do with roads, and we just feel like that with the communication that's needed, we're not trying to add another layer of bureaucracy. We will be hiring at least one additional person to make sure that it will be a quick process. But we feel like that we can be better partners if we know ahead of time. It is hard to get a phone call at 6 a.m. saying, there's 200 trucks lined up in front of my house. What's going on? And this is where I live. And we look at them and say, we don't know. And so we're just excited to be a part of the process, bring some good collaboration. We are absolute fans of industry. We love working with industry. We know that they're our bread and butter, and we just want to have a more close alignment. Mike, do you have anything to add to that? Why don't you go, Mike, why don't you go ahead and go up front? You do it, Mike. By the way, Mike Hyde with Duchesne County and Plipco.
Yeah, Duchesne County went through a process in 2012 of regulating the oil and gas wells in the county, and established a process where, if a new well was in a area that had a very low density development potential, that there was no requirement for a conditional use permit. And if a well was more than 660 feet away from a home, didn't really have to do much in terms of mitigating impacts on those residents. And if you were going to be less than 660 feet away from a home, then you had to work with that homeowner to try to mitigate impacts. But as Commissioner Hansen has indicated, with a lot of the growth in the industry and the amount of production coming out of the county now and the amount of impacts associated with heavy truck traffic and noise mostly, the commission has directed the staff to prepare a zoning ordinance amendment. And the amendment, as Commissioner Hansen said, would require a conditional use permit for all new oil and gas wells. We don't know yet if there'll be any exceptions to the rule for wells that have already received, already have a surface use agreement lined up or right-of-ways lined up, or if it'll be applying to wells that have not been spudded yet. The ordinance is not in final form yet. The first discussion of the ordinance is scheduled now for the County Planning Commission on April 3rd. That'll be in the County Administration Building, like 11 blocks up the center street here. The meeting starts at 5 in the evening. We have 6 items on the agenda, and I think that's going to be the last item. So it could very well be 6:30 or so before we get to that. One other aspect of the ordinance is that we've been getting a lot of noise complaints lately from people who are living close to flare gas fired generators that are generating power for Bitcoin mining. And those can get pretty noisy, and they're bothering folks that are close to those. Right now, the ordinance says that those would have to be set back at least a quarter mile from the nearest home, unless they are put within a building that is enclosed and insulated to muffle that noise. So if we do require a conditional use permit for many of the new wells, in the past we've worked with guys like Don Hamilton at Star Point Enterprises, who some of the companies have used to prepare the applications for that. We would notify property owners within 300 feet of the property that the new well site would be on, so that they would be aware up front of what's being proposed. But I think one of the key points is that through that process, it would force a discussion between the energy company and the county road department to try to make sure that before the trucks show up to start working on the site, that the county road department has worked with the company to make sure that the roads are adequate for that traffic, that haul routes are identified for roads that have previously been built to handle the traffic, or perhaps there needs to be some road improvements before the drilling starts. So this is going to take a while to hammer out the ordinance. Last time we did this in 2012, we had a lot of meetings and a lot of revisions to the ordinance. Commissioner Winterton at the time was a county commissioner, and he remembers it well. We're embarking on this. As soon as we can get a draft ordinance finalized, we'll get that distributed to the industry. Promise to get it to Ricky so she can get it out to everybody. And I guess anyone that wants to communicate with us on that can contact any of the county commissioners or me at the county administration building. Mike Godfredson is the one that's been preparing the ordinance. He's kind of preparing to step into my place as I retire in October. So either Mike Hyde or Mike Godfredson. You can grab me after the meeting also to get more information on that, contact information if you like.
And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but this will not apply to any wells drilled on BLM, federal land, or on tribal.
Right, this is for the fee owners. And as you all know, most of the activity now is on fee lands. There's not a lot going on, at least in Duchesne County, on the BLM and forest lands. So it's all an effort by the county commissioners to try to help make things fit and work with our other residents and property owners who are seeing these impacts at this time. So.
I think too is that our plan at this point is that if you were still in any phase of the planning, that you would be required to get a conditional use permit, even if you're somewhat down the road. If you haven't started drilling, you're still in the planning phase, we would require that. And it would be fairly quickly, but there again would be, I think there's a 30 days before an ordinance goes into effect. One of the concerns that's already came to us, will you have the staff to handle it? And I can guarantee you we will, whatever it takes.
Okay. Travis, you had something? Oh.
Yeah, thanks, John. Travis Gray with Division Oil, Gas, and Mining down in Carbon County down there. I wanted to let everybody know and welcome them out. We're going to have our next Carbon Emery Energy Collaborative in Price at the Southeastern Regional Development Agency building. This will be on May 2nd, so kind of keep an eye on your emails. And if you're not on the email list, get with one of us or look up our email site online, and we'll get an invite out to you.
I'm just curious how you're going to coordinate with the federal agencies on this permit, because we do permit a lot of wells that are fee surface.
It is. Yours not close enough.
I'm just not close. There we go. Yeah, I'm just wondering how you're going to coordinate with the federal agencies.
Again, I think it would be similar to Uinta County. It will be another permit. If you're in the county on private land, on fee land, it would be another permit that you would need to get. In addition to what the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining provides. But if it's on federal land, this will not affect any drilling on federal land. Those will be required now.
Anyone else?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Sheila Vance with the Division of Air Quality, and I just wanted to take a few minutes. I know everybody's waiting for lunch, but we'll speak to this in the July meeting, hopefully in more detail. But we did receive money through DOE and EPA for helping closure of marginal wells. This is part of the Inflation Reduction Act monies and the methane emission reduction plans that are coming out right now. So Utah did receive award of that of $2.7 million. So we are currently working with DOE and also through DOGM and such to try to put together a plan for folks to be able to come to our website and apply for this grant. Right now, it's looking like even with $2.7 million, right now it's fully funded. We're looking at maybe cost share opportunities also. So that will depend on how many wells we could close. So it would only be about 15 to 20 if we're looking at about an average cost of $150,000 to do full closure on a well. And again, a marginal well is 15 barrels a day or less. But I just wanted to take a moment to let you guys know that we did get this grant and we will be working on it. And like I said, hopefully at the July meeting, we'll come here with more details and there'll be a way for you to start looking into it. But just wanted you to start thinking about it. That's it.
Anyone else? I know you're hungry, so we won't delay. I just want to say, do you have anything to add, Bart?
I was just going to say if we could give our speakers one more round of applause. Nobody's going for free lunch anymore, but they come and volunteer their time.
And we appreciate Duchesne County and their hospitality. Our next meeting will be July 18th, so look for that. And if you want to email, and you're not on the list, contact one of us and we'll get you there. So right now, lunch is in the arena area, so thank you for attending.